We're going to learn 4 different shading techniques: charcoal, scribble, cross-hatching and hatching, and stippling. So rule up your page into 4 squares and then we can get started. So let's start with charcoal first. So charcoal comes in different ways. So you can get charcoal pencils like this one here, or you can get charcoal sticks, and they come in different weights. So they might be light, they might be medium, they might be dark. So I'm getting the dark one out just for some dark tones, and I'm also using the pencil. So sketch out your object or apple, whatever you're using today for your practicing. Sketch it out, make sure you've got the light shining on it so you get a nice shadow so you can see the difference between the light and the dark parts. So I've just swapped to the darker stick now, and you can see already I'm not pressing very hard and it comes out quite dark, and I'm focusing on where I can see the shadows. Don't forget to put the shadow that's cast on the ground, and then you're just going to start building up your tones. So I'm not pressing very hard, and I'm just working on the dark areas first, because the great thing about charcoal is you can smudge it. So now I'm using my finger to go from dark to light. So I'm just pulling the charcoal over to the light parts to get that light tone. Don't forget to leave the shine on the apple. So there's a definite shine where the light is hitting it. It's really important that you leave that white. So try not to get too much charcoal on that space. But you can use your kneadable eraser if you need to lighten it up a little bit. Kneadable erasers do work on charcoal. It won't get rid of every single thing on your page if you want it to be completely white, but it will definitely lighten up the areas. Now with shadows, the darkest part of the shadow is always right underneath the object. So I'm focusing there first because charcoal is very dark, starting with the dark part, and then I'm just pulling it out when I'm smudging, because it does lighten up as it gets further away on the shadow. So have a good look at your object and the shadow that it's casting, and you'll see that it's darker closer to the object and it gets lighter and lighter as it goes out. Okay, next we're going to move on to drawing with pencils, and I call this technique the scribble technique. So sketch out your apple or your object again. Doesn't have to be perfect, just get the general shape as well as the shadow. And for this drawing I'm using a 2B pencil just to get started, and I'll use a darker pencil when it comes to doing the darker shades and tones. Alright, so the scribble technique is a little bit just like doing ovals and ovals over and over again, so thin ovals, and I'm just scribbling. We scribble all the time, so you know how to scribble. But when I scribble back over the top of the lines that I've just done, and that's easy when you do that kind of circular motion. So I'm trying to blend those lines together. I'm going back over the top of the lines that I've just drawn, and I'm just doing kind of a mid-tone at the moment. I'm not going too dark, I'm not going too light, just building up the tone slowly. So I'm starting on the dark edge again, and when I get over to the light side, I'm going to be pushing less hard, so more lightly on my pencil. So you press harder where it's darker and you ease up the pressure when it's lighter. So I'm just going to fill in my whole apple, just scribbling, not too dark and not too light, but don't forget to leave that shine part completely white, because it is, if you have a look on the object, there'll be a white shine where the light is hitting. Leave that completely white. You can use your eraser or your kneadable eraser if you need to lighten it up if you go a bit too heavy. Cover the whole apple with a mid-tone, and then you're going to come in with your darker tones and lighten up any areas that you need to as well. So we're trying to get rid of the lines. We're smoothing it out by doing scribbles over and over again. So you can see here I'm starting to do the next layer. So this is my darker layer. So I'm really observing my object and picking out the darker parts, and I'm just pressing a bit harder on my pencil as I'm scribbling. I'm just building up those tones to make it look as 3D as possible. Then I'm going to swap to a darker pencil. So I'm using a 2B, but then I'll be using a 5B, and I'm just going to keep building up those darker tones to make them really dark and stand out. So especially on your shadow, the darker the tone, it'll really make your object pop out and look three-dimensional from the page. So sketch yourself out another apple or the object that you're drawing, and now we're going to learn hatching. So hatching is just a way of shading where you're using repetitive lines that are all going in the same direction to build up dark and light tones. And cross hatching is when you do lines going one direction and then you cross them over and go the other way. So you can use both of these in the drawing, and a lot of the times you will use hatching and cross hatching. So you're just building up the tones with however many lines there are. It'll be darker if they're closer together and you overlap them more. And if they're further apart, it won't be as dark. So I'm focusing on putting more lines together on the left-hand side because that's where the shadow is. And then when it gets to the light part, I might just do some hatching with the lines further apart. So it doesn't need to be as much tone on the right-hand side, but on the left, I'm doing a lot of overlapping and lots of lines close together. Cross-hatching is not an easy technique. It does take a lot of practice, but give it a go because it can give you some really nice texture and effects in your drawing. last technique we'll learn for this session is stippling. So I've already started to do stippling on this apple on my other page, so I thought I'd show you it when it's just a little bit further developed. It does take a lot of time to do stippling, and it is basically just dots over and over and over again. I'm using a Sharpie, like a thicker permanent texture for this. You can use a pencil, you can use a fine liner. I'm using a thick one just so it's a bit easier to see. And you're building up the dots, so the closer the dots are together, the darker the shade will be. And when I get over to the lighter parts, just like the hatching, my dots are further apart. So I'm building up. It takes a long time, so don't rush this one. Just take your time and build up the dots. So where you want it to be darker, the dots are closer together. So that's it. Now you've learned how to use charcoal, you've learned how to do scribbling, hatching and cross-hatching, and stippling. So please practice these as much as you can, and you'll get better and better the more you practice. Have fun!